Hey everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. So as we're continuing our unit here on the revolutionary mindset, today it hits the fan. The colonies have had enough and it's going to be go time. So without trying to give too many precursors to this because it escalates pretty quickly, let's go ahead and get started today. So we talked about yesterday that the Declaration of Resolves, which the Continental Congress, which was a group of colonists that got together, they were like, hey, we need to work things out, tried to be the adults. King George just tore it up and could not believe that the colonists would possibly think that they are competent enough or on his level enough to communicate with him. That is going to infuriate the colonists. The colonists start to realize it's kind of a point of no return that working things out may not be effective. So you got to have a plan B. Well, England is the most powerful military on earth. The idea of the colonists trying to fight against Britain is insane. The colonists didn't even have an army. So how are the colonies going to stand up to the most powerful country on earth? This would be the equivalent of, 5 counties in America, anywhere, teaming up together to fight against the United States military. It should last about, 10 minutes. And that's honestly, on paper, what it should have turned out to be. I'll give you I don't want to jump too much into that because that's the U.S. history and I can go way down that rabbit hole. But let's talk about how these events directly affect what our current government is. I'm going to do that by telling you the story of how this escalates after the Declaration of Resolves gets rejected. All right. So the colonists realize they may need to fight against Britain. They hope it doesn't come to that, but if they need to. So they create an entire militia. They call them Minutemen, like just regular everyday people that can hop into battle at a minute's notice. They're called Minutemen. And they start stockpiling weapons around Boston, where a lot of this takes place at. There's 2 little towns near Boston called Lexington and Concord. Britain isn't dumb. They realize that the colonists appear to be stockpiling weapons because all the weapons seem to not be around anymore. So they must be getting stored somewhere, which is exactly what's happening in Lexington and Concord. That these weapons are being stockpiled in case the colonists have to stand up to the redcoats. I mean, this is like having a little gnat on your shoulder if you're the redcoats and you're like, okay, this is silly. Like, what do they think they're going to do? But we don't want it to escalate. So the redcoats, all right, here in this picture, are tasked with walking out to Lexington and Concord and collecting all these weapons because the colonists are just going to hurt themselves. So the first thing they do to prevent the colonists from fighting back against King George and England is to take their weapons. And now the colonists also aren't dumb. They knew this was going to happen. So the redcoats, they start marching off to Lexington and Concord. And this is where the famous story of Paul Revere that I had referenced in a previous lesson, where he goes racing through, letting everybody know the British are coming, the British are coming, the British are coming, which is true. Paul Revere did, he was part of this Committees of Correspondence, something we'll talk more about in U.S. history, where he would communicate with them, letting them know that they're coming. He would never have said the British are coming because at the time everybody was British. He wouldn't have said the British are coming. That wouldn't have made any sense. He probably said the redcoats are coming. So Paul Revere kind of warns everybody. So as the redcoats go marching, and they're going to march from Boston, all right, and they're going to walk out to the first town of Lexington to look for weapons. So the redcoats just, they're not out here to fight anybody. This is a elite fighting force that is marching out here to just pick up weapons and come back. When they get to Lexington, it is deserted at first. They don't find any weapons. And then a group of militiamen open fire on the redcoats. It's basically like one round volley, but they try to stay in open field, and the redcoats open up a volley, and it's ugly. And the militia that actually opened fire on the redcoats here come try to take their guns, realize they are wildly outmatched. So they turn around and scamper away after one volley. When everybody fires one shot on both sides, they realize yeah, this is not going to work out well for us. So they scamper away. The redcoats are like, did they just open fire on us? What are they doing? Again, the redcoats, their job is to come get the weapons. They're not trying to escalate this into like a war or something crazy like that. But they're like, did a militia just, what is wrong with them? So after Lexington, they're going to keep on marching. And they're going to march from Lexington to Concord. This is the next town where they know these guns are at. When they get near Concord, it's different because you have to cross a creek, and then on the other side there is kind of a natural berm or a barricade to get into Concord. All those soldiers that had fled from Lexington went and teamed up with the other militia that were waiting for this at Concord, and they're barricaded in on the other side, before you get to Concord, and they open fire on the redcoats who are on the other side of the berm and the other side of the creek. So it is a much better defensive position these are just farmers. This isn't like any military. These are just colonists who are defending, knowing they're coming to take their guns. And if the redcoats come and take their guns, they have very little ability to fight back, like in the literal aspect of fighting back. So the redcoats take some casualties early on here. There's only a couple volleys from each side before the redcoats realize, wait, what are we doing? And the commanding officer's like, man, we're here to get guns. The redcoats could absolutely slaughter every single person that is here. I mean, there's no question about that. But that's not their job. Their job is to get guns to prevent tensions from rising. So after a couple of volleys, the commanding officer's like, no. We are not going to be the one to escalate this into something that it shouldn't be. We're going to just go back and reassess how we're going to handle this situation. So the redcoats turn around and they actually leave. Well, in the colonists' mind, they believe they stood up militarily, and to a point they did, stood up militarily to the redcoats, and because of that, and they shot them, and they feel like they defeated them in battle, and that they can legitimately stand up to the most powerful country on earth and turn them back. And the colonists are like, oh my gosh, this is like a real option here. We could actually fight them and win. Logistically, they should not be able to, but this is called the shot that's heard around the world, because once the colonists open fire on Britain, it shows that the colonists are willing to fight. And England owns a lot of stuff in other parts of the world, and the rest of the world's like, ooh, wait, those colonists are going to demand their independence? Let's see how this works out. Now, what's really important here, as far as civics goes, when we create our Constitution, Second Amendment of the Constitution. It's a pivotal one in America. We're one of the few countries that guarantees this right. It's the right to have guns, to keep and bear arms, and to have a militia. It's part of our Constitution. The American people were never going to accept the Constitution unless they were allowed to have guns, because they realized, just like here, when the government tries to stop the people collectively from standing up to them, first thing they do is they're going to try to take their guns. This is common throughout history. So America goes the other way and says 100% the government cannot take guns from the population. And we're going to talk a lot about the Second Amendment. We're going to talk a lot about the Constitution. But it is, as in modern society, in the 21st century, it seems wild that there's all these guns in society with all the gun deaths. But the guns are designed in the Constitution for the population to have it. And it's not for deer hunting. The guns are designed literally to be able to stand up to the United States military. That was the intent straight up when they created the Constitution, which by modern standards, we look at it and we're like, should they have thought that out a little bit more? But at the same time, it's just a direct result of Britain trying to prevent the colonists from standing up to the oppression that the colonists felt. So, not surprisingly, will always be debate, but what the intent was when they're going to create the Second Amendment, that is not really up for it. It was clearly to be able to stand up to the government so that the government couldn't stop you from rebelling. So the question here is, when creating the Constitution years after this event, about 11 years after this event is the official Constitution, and we'll talk about that in detail, America will add the Second Amendment to our Constitution, which guarantees the right to keep and bear arms for the purpose of a militia. Why do you think this is one of the first things added to the new Constitution? So we just answer that in detail. So pause me, answer that, and we're moving on. So after the shot heard around the world, they're like, okay, the colonists are like, oh, we got to get together and talk more about this in detail because obviously we have escalated this. So the Continental Congress gets together again. The Declaration of Resolves when they try to be an adults. Now there's some different people. They have some different ideas here on what they want to do. So it's not exactly the same format as the Continental Congress that had formed a little bit ago to talk to King George. So because of that, it's now referred to as the Second Continental Congress. This is the most famous one. Second Continental Congress realizes, I think we may have passed the point of no return. So they're going to pass the Olive Branch Petition. So the Declaration of Resolves is like, hey, here's what we can do to work together on this, right? And King George tore it up. So the Olive Branch Petition is Second Continental Congress saying, all right, if you don't want to catch these hands, here's what you got to do, King George. I mean, it's basically an ultimatum. Basically, King George, either you give us what we want or it's go time. We 100% realize he ain't going to go for this. But it is, a last-ditch effort. Hey, if you don't want... And again, we don't even have a military, all right? So we passed the Olive Branch Petition. Didn't King George know? He's probably not even going to read it. And we realize we don't have an army, so we need to make one. And what we do to create an army is we appoint the only person that we have with any military experience. So this painting right here is of the Second Continental Congress. There you can see the detail on all the faces here because these are all the very important men that were here. Kind of front and center here, you have John Adams, who at this point, trying to make up for getting the redcoats off after the Boston Massacre, is a pivotal part here, will eventually be the second president of the United States. And also Thomas Jefferson here, who will be the third president of the United States, or pivotal parts here of creating this thing called the Olive Branch Petition. The next thing they need to do is create an army. So they pick the only person with any military experience, a guy named George Washington. So George Washington, pretty famous. If you don't know who George Washington is, that's fine for this class. I'll tell you everything you need to. I would be surprised. George Washington will be the first president of the United States eventually, but he was a colonel in the British military. So he was a high-ranking official in the British military. He's since retired. He's in Virginia. He's an American. So he has like the know-how and knowledge of the British military in America and loves America. So who better than just go ahead and promote him up to general, because we're just making it up as we go, creating our army. And this way he has some military experience that he can train his troops. I was trying to find a picture of his troops here. This is very hard to find because, spoiler alert, America's going to end up winning the Revolutionary War. We got very lucky, very good timing in a lot of ways. And George Washington is going to be a massive hero out of the Revolutionary War. He loses a lot of battles. He does win some stuff. He is a very competent leader. But because he's such a hero in American history, it is very hard to find a legitimate picture of him as a war hero and not just some flamboyant thing. This is actually from Valley Forge, which is a unique story we'll talk about in U.S. history. But this picture is probably the best. Look at, like, his men don't wear the same uniforms. They're short on supplies. Like, it's a big part of this specific story. Like, the men don't have shoes. But this is the army he's inheriting. These are not trained men. He's just taking farmers out here. They're not even getting paid. So while Minutemen are just farmers, somebody comes into your town, you pick up your gun, you fight them until they leave your town and you're done. The colonial army, the Continental Army, all right, they're full time and they're not even getting paid. So you have to like abandon your family, bring your own weapons, your own clothes, your own food, and travel around the country fighting the most powerful military on earth. It's needless to say, it's hard to keep them together, but George Washington does as good of a job as he possibly could. It is really shocking that we will win the Revolutionary War. But The question here is, when America makes the Constitution after the Revolutionary War, one of the guarantees is that the citizens can petition their representative. How do you think King George's reaction led to the rule in today's American society? So the First Amendment to the Constitution is the right to self-expression. You have a right as an American today, based on the Constitution that comes out after the Revolutionary War, that you can petition your representative. You have a right to contact them. All right, you're on their level. It's kind of a unique thing to write in there. Why do you think that is? How is King George's reaction when we tried to write him, and how do you think that affected the way we wanted to run our own country? So pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. So we're up to 1776, pretty important year in American history. So there is this guy named Thomas Paine. He's going to be very necessary. Half of the country, we'll say half, doesn't care about what is happening. As crazy as that sounds now. If you lived in the South and you're a plantation owner or you're just a poor worker down South, this didn't apply to you. It doesn't matter really what happens. Your life is going to remain the same. All right. There were a lot of people that were called patriots that wanted America to be their own country. And there were people that were loyalists who were like, what are we doing? No, just let's make amends with England. Why are we being weird? Thomas Paine is going to write a pamphlet. It can't really be called a book because it's not really long enough to be a book. Thomas Paine is going to write a pamphlet that gets widespread throughout the colonies called Common Sense. And he makes the argument very eloquently, but also to a level that the masses of America, the inhabitants of America, we start calling the collective group of colonies America here, it's common sense to want to have your own government. He basically spells out England cares about England things. They're 4,000 miles away. They don't really care about us. It's not their fault, but we need to take care of ourselves. He writes this pamphlet called Common Sense, and it really changes the view of a lot of Americans who didn't care to be like, you know what? Yeah, heck yeah. Let's do it. Let's go be our own country. So Thomas Paine, very influential. Again, once again, the media changing the perception of the population is a huge part in modern society and modern politics. But you can see it from the beginning. The Boston Massacre and now Common Sense. Media is really shaping the way society views current events. So once everybody's on board, it's go time. And by go time, it is time to sign or actually write this thing called the Declaration of Independence. And on July 4, 1776, where it is signed, it is written. Thomas Jefferson is the main writer of this. There's actually a guy who's got really neat handwriting. That's his job, and he actually wrote it. Even though these are Thomas Jefferson's words, he's over the guy telling him what to write. So otherwise, you're going to think, like I did way too much of my life, that Thomas Jefferson had some fantastic handwriting. There's a guy whose job is to just write really nice before all the industrial printers. So the Declaration of Independence says, hey, England, America's going to be our own country now. And America declares their independence, that they're their own country. This is like a breakup letter to England. It's not like a breakup letter. It is. All right. And so the Declaration of Independence says, hey, England, it's not you. It's me. I deserve better. See ya. And we break up with England and we let them know that we are just going to be our own country now. Anybody who signed this is a traitor to England. So if anybody who signs this, if they lose this war, they're all going to be executed. So if you've ever heard anybody sign, or you have to sign a signature like, give me your John Hancock, which I don't know if anybody says that anymore, but the reason people say that, the term for signature is John Hancock, is because they're like, all right, we have signed it. We're breaking up with England. You guys come on up here and sign it. So the whole bottom of the paper is empty, and they're like, Tom. And everybody's kind of like, I don't know what we're going to do. And John Hancock's like, I want King George to see my name. And he goes up there, grabs the pen, like writes his name really big here, so his name is really big. And everybody's like, yeah. And they're like, but John, man, we can't all write our name that big, it won't fit. So everybody else had to write their name like a normal size. But John Hancock made his signature really big in the center of the page because he wanted King George to see his name. So famously is known for his signature, and pretty much as far as survey courses go, that's all we'll ever talk about John Hancock. But, so, and this is worth mentioning here, the Declaration of Independence. How is King George going to react to it? And I started thinking, because present day, all right, the Declaration of Independence is in museums under all these, if you've seen like the movies like National Treasure, or they're trying to steal the Declaration of Independence. It's like, it's our founding document. It is like the most important document in America because like our first real one, this and the Constitution. So it's like super secure. We have it in a museum in Washington, D.C. You can see it sometimes. They're like, I'll make sure it doesn't decay over time. And I started thinking, wait a minute. King George, Declaration of Resolves, tore it up. We sent him the Olive Branch petition. He tore it up. Didn't even read it, whatever. We sent him the Declaration of Independence? At what point in our, because now England and America, we're friends now, as of the recording of this. And at what point did we get like to be buddy-buddy again? Be like, hey, England, remember that time we broke up with you? Can we get that back? Can we get that back? And I've always wondered that. Like in the back of my mind, I always think about when I teach it, and then I'm like, I'm gonna go look that up. And then finally one day I went and looked it up, expecting a quick answer, and there wasn't a quick answer. And I was like, oh, that's kind of a weird thing. So I did a little digging. It didn't take long. This makes the story so much better. We were so done with England. When we broke up with them, we didn't even tell them. We just ghosted them. We did not acknowledge that England should know this. We signed this, high five ourselves, and go about our life like we're a whole separate country now. From this point on, we're our own country. England will figure it out eventually. I mean, it all gets put in the newspapers, everybody finds out about it. But yeah, King George finds out through the newspaper that, America's there. So we didn't send this to anybody. We didn't need to. We did this for us, for self-health. All right. So yeah, we just straight ghosted England. He'll figure it out eventually. And sure enough, he does. And it's going to lead to the Revolutionary War. So the question here is, what was the Declaration of Independence? And why is that document so important in American history? So pause me, answer that completely. And then it's worth noting because otherwise it's just like a huge gap in this course. This is a famous painting of George Washington during the Revolutionary War crossing the Delaware, where he's going to on like Christmas in 1776, and it's going to be one of his great first wins. He'd been getting beat a little bit. So we're not really going to talk about the Revolutionary War because war isn't a really big part of civics, but I do kind of, because we're going to kind of pick up on, and we're creating these new governments. Like, what happened to the war, the most powerful country on earth? How did that happen? Well, France doesn't like England either. When France realizes the colonies, because remember the whole French and Indian War, when the colonies stand up to England, France says, we're going to stand up to them too. And France declares war on England at the same time. So like 95% of England's military has to focus on France during our Revolutionary War. So England can only send over like 5% of their military. And we, with the leadership of George Washington, is able to defeat the much smaller size military that England sends over. We also don't have a navy, and that was really crushing us. Once France realized that we were pretty good and that we could help out, they are going to send over some of their navy to help us out in some inlets and stuff like that. So we just got lucky. France really is going to help us out in the Revolutionary War, and without France, there's no way we are going to be able to defeat that small army that England sends over. They're going to surrender, and America will officially be their own country. And we're going to pick up tomorrow kind of talking about the governmental aspects of how the new United States is going to have to make a government literally like out of nothing. All right, That's as far as we're going to get today. See you guys tomorrow.